That's a good question. I don't know. I'd have to look that up. Sorry.
The marine reptile in the that they see in I think over in England or whatever.
You mean Loch Ness?
Loch Ness, yes. That could be warm-blooded because that's a cold lake.
It's a cold lake for sure, if he's really there.
Yeah.
I'm more skeptical now than ever that he's there. All right, I think.
Well, they don't live in the lake. They come in from the ocean.
I just think it's a lot more Scotchman than that.
No, I know people have seen it.
I know that. Nobody gets a good picture, and the ones that we thought were good turned out to be forgeries.
And what wasn't
Some
there a
of them,
submarine?
not all of them.
Well, they
Wasn't
wanted
there-
to send a small sub down there.
I thought some guys were playing Loch Ness in a submarine and confessed it,
It
on their
could
deathbed.
be. The best pictures or the best evidence I saw was the Rhine photographs. All right, what they did is they stuck cameras down there, and when a creature of a certain size came by, and it'd have to be a certain size in order to trigger it, they'd take a picture. And what they got were
It was a fin. Right. A fin.
okay, now maybe it's a good sized sturgeon or something. I don't know. So far, nobody's come up with the creature. The one we thought was a good that the Japanese fishing trawler pulled up. Let's see, do I have that picture? Yeah. All right. Turns out to be. Oh, I thought we had a bigger picture than that.
They claim.
All right. If you've ever seen this picture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Some people thought it was a dead plesiosaur. You know, one of those marine reptiles. Okay, but it turns out most now suggest, because they took some skin samples and analyzed it, it's probably a severely decayed basking shark. All right, the head's just gone, and the way it was tied off, it kind of looks like that. But analysis of the skin itself or of the integument that was left suggests that it's
Or
probably
it
more
could be
basking
lying.
shark. All right, okay. That's the way it goes. If you see one of these, you know, take a picture. Right?
Yeah.
People are going to want to know that, all right? If you come
Bring it
across
to the
stuff like
meeting.
this. All right, so in the 70s, there was a revolution. We started thinking dinosaurs were more like birds. One, for the Haversian canals. Two, I keep putting that marker, for what we call predator-prey ratios. Okay, let me explain this. All right, well, we know when a lion lives in the Serengeti, a lion's warm-blooded, really fast predator, that there are so many lions per gazelle, say. All right, if it's a warm-blooded animal, there's a lot less predator out there than there is for prey, because he can grab them and do stuff. All right. In reptiles, we know that that is bigger. In other words, there's a lot more predators than prey, or not more, but the ratio is a lot more the same because they're cold-blooded. All right. So some smart people decided we're going to look at dinosaur predator-prey ratios. Now there's a couple of assumptions there. You assume that what you're looking at is a living assemblage, that kind of a thing, right? And so that may or may not be the case.
Assumption, yeah.
That sort of thing. But when they did look at these, and Bob Becker does a good job explaining that in the books, we found that it was more like the lion than the reptile. All right? They suggested that these things had a higher rate of metabolism. Okay? It could be true. All right? Also, we started looking at the structure of dinosaurs. Like I mentioned, in these older photographs, you see a lot of tail draggers. In the newer stuff, everybody's got their tails stuck out there, all right? Because they didn't drag it on the ground, they held it up. Now, why do we think this? Well, when we look at the engineering standpoint of, say, a T-Rex, if you're going like this and walking around, it's all right. But if you're going like this and your tail's hanging out the back, you put all the weight on those big legs and you have a counterbalance. Makes more sense from an engineering standpoint. All right? And allows them to walk easier. And in fact, we see animals like this today. We call them birds. They do that basic thing. Okay, got the little tail out there and all that, and that's how a lot of them walk. Well, the dinosaurs, a lot of the sauropods, or not sauropods, but the more carnivorous ones that we always think about, that walk up that are bipedal, okay, look more like that. And when you put the skeletons together, they seem to gel real nice that way, okay? And so that's the higher energetic stance then. So Herbersian canals, predator-prey ratio, just a basic engineering standpoint. And then he started looking at some of them, and some of them had little dimples on the bones. It looks like they had some kind of covering there, different from scales that reptiles usually had. Now it turns out when we look at the bigger ones, we do find a lot of scale impressions, but some of them seem to have some kind of covering. And so for instance, in those they all look naked. When you look in this book, everybody's got fur, okay? Probably a little bit more than there really was, all right? But because evolution's now suggests that dinosaurs evolved into birds, we're finding it all over. I remember I was at the San Diego Museum one year, and they had this giant, I mean, this thing was 20 feet tall, and it had feathers all over it, okay? And I'm going there, wow, I didn't, you know, I was following the fossils, I didn't see anything like that. Sure enough, I get close to the sign, and it's a theoretical reconstruction.
Yeah.
Michael, all right. And in fact, when I started asking some of the people around there, some of the curators, and you know, some of them are going like this. Because apparently the guy who got that put in there, not everybody was on board with that. All right, that was a little bit over the top. All right, so okay, so you got those people now. So everything's got an energetic stance. It's got hair or sort of feather-like things. We do find feathers on like Archaeopteryx. That's a bird that was supposedly transitional. We do find that. And in fact, they're in the lithographic limestone in Germany. And it's like they're just sort of splat right on the ground. All right? But these other things, it's a little bit more difficult. You don't find a lot of the hair or some of that. But we're starting to get these kind of reconstructions. Now, again, reconstruction, we have what we call artistic license. Now, we're also seeing a lot more colors now. The Chinese have done some work on this and actually looked at some of the cells there and done some analysis. And some other groups have. So there probably were colored, okay? They probably had bright colors. They weren't all drab and gray like we've always reconstructed them. Just what exactly they look like, we don't know. All right, but there's probably more we can get out of the fossils and the ground and all that kind of thing. So now everything's got tails hanging way out there. All right, you see that? All right, everything's bouncing, and if you look in Bob Becker's book, I mean, we got, let's see, where's my favorite here? You got these guys just, all right, where's that one? It looks like a dance party. Everybody's just flying up in the air, running into each other, okay, you know. We are super dinosaurs, you know, kind of a thing. It's probably the case that it's probably somewhere in between, perhaps. All right, because even the big mammals on the African plains don't, you know, jump around all the time, you know. They'll run for a little bit, but nobody's flying all over, you know, and all that kind of thing. That takes a lot of energy. Now it's true. Reptiles a little bit more efficient, but if these guys are more like mammals and all that, they're going to eat a lot too. Okay? All right, so how do these fit into a biblical worldview, or can they? Well, you've probably heard some of this if you've heard a lecture on dinosaurs at all. A little bit about this. If the biblical view is correct, then dinosaurs were made. And these, again, are the things that walk up on land, would have been made on day 6, correct? All right, so day 6. Which means they might have been walking around the Garden of Eden. Okay? That would be interesting. Cool. All right. In the beginning, the Bible suggests
Yeah,
everything in
named him.
plants, like I mentioned before. And so you wouldn't have to worry about T-Rex necessarily. You would have been all right with that. After the fall, maybe you got some more things going on. And then particularly after the flood, you were in trouble. Okay? Because it also suggests after the flood that the fear of man was put in animals. That's probably a good thing, all right? Because they probably looked at humans and decided now they're tasty looking. Okay, so if you can scare them a little bit, that's good. All right? Some suggest dinosaurs are mentioned in the Bible. One of the oldest books in the Bible is the book of Job. Job, you remember, is that real uplifting book where everybody's happy? Yeah, right. Okay, Job gets all these sicknesses, his friends come over, such friends. All right, you want to just get out of here, all right? But at the very end of Job is the longest sermon in the Bible, actually. God's talking to Job out of a tornado. So again, this is great special effects. Somebody ought to do this movie, okay? Here he is, sitting on a dung, on a garbage heap, basically. He's got boils all over his skin. His friends are there. I can't get the exact picture of it all. It's near the Jordan River, because he mentions that in there. And God's talking to him out of a whirlwind, or what we might call today a tornado. All right, so you got the voice of God coming out, just like if you've seen the Old Testament, the Mel's 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. Think of that kind of a thing. All right, so what does God talk about? When you read the story, it's sort of heaven jeopardy. Okay, he starts asking questions. First thing he says is, gird up your loins like a man and be ready to answer questions. All right. Now, when big guys say that to little people like me, I get scared. When God says that to you, all right, that's way over. All right. Who is it that speaks with words without knowledge? My kids do that a lot. All right, say words without knowledge. They think they know everything and they don't. But when God says that to you, okay, you're in for it. You're in for it. And then he starts going, it's a science lesson. Latin exhortation. Where were you when I did this? How do you know how this happened? Read it sometime. It's amazing what's in there. A lot of those things we understand more today. Some of them we still don't. Okay, and he gets into different types of animals. But the last two animals he ends up with in chapter, I think it's 39 and 40, are behemoth and Leviathan. Okay? And behemoth, it says something like, behold now behemoth, which I made with you. What?
Leviathan's chapter 41.
41, okay.
Yeah, I'm actually teaching that right now in my Bible study class.
All right. And I think
That's why I know
does
it.
it start in 40 or 39?
No, Behemoth is in 40.
This is in 40.
And it's only half of the chapter, but the
Right.
whole chapter 41 is on
On
Leviathan.
Leviathan, right. Okay, behemoth. Behold now behemoth, which I made with you, or on the sixth day. He eats grass like an ox, has bones like bars of iron. One translation says he moves his tail like a cedar tree. And a lot of people, when you look at the commentators on this, say this is either a hippo or an elephant.
Sauropod.
All right? Ever seen the tail of an elephant? Yeah. Cedar tree's not exactly what comes to mind. Hippo's even worse. Little thing back there that sort of spins and they shoot the poop all over. All right? All right? That's what they do. So something that has a tail like a cedar, that's a big boy, it seems. And it says he doesn't fear going in the water. He just sort of rushes in there, this kind of thing. And again, even though it might be, it eats plants, it seems to suggest, even though it's a plant eater, the size of it is what makes it scary to Job. All right? Just like an elephant. Yeah, an elephant eats plants. Do you want to go in there and go, no, you don't want to do that. People die doing that, all right? He'll go, and that's it. You're jelly. All right? So behemoth seems to be a land creature. Now Leviathan's very interesting. Leviathan seems to perhaps be a land or marine reptile. All right? It says when it goes down to the deep, the old King James says something like the deep would be hoary, or everybody would have white hair, kind of a thing. It also seems to suggest that heart is a heart of another millstone. Okay, really, really strong heart, or a very heart that needs to pump blood up. That would suggest something with a long neck, perhaps. All right? I think behemoth is probably, if what we're thinking of, something like one of the big sauropods, right? And that the other one might be like we saw with the marine reptiles, perhaps. In fact, I had it on here real nice, and it's gone. Okay, I think it might be a novosaur.
Is it an HP?
Huh?
Is that an HP or something?
It was an HP, yeah.
HP?
Yeah.
Can I try my plug?
Sure. Come on, try your plug. He brought his computer with him.
Well, he's doing that. Just two more comments.
Go ahead.
Behemoth is actually a plural Hebrew noun, so it's thought that behemoth might be describing a class of sauropods. It may not be just a brachiosaur or a brontosaur. It might be a group of these type of animals that behemoth is representing. And the reason I asked you about the Avestion, is that how you say it? Avestion canal?
Aversian canal.
About the marine reptiles is because Leviathan breathes fire.
Right. Now, some of the, Dr. Gish used to talk about this. This was his first dinosaur book that he wrote. Dinosaurs, those terrible lizards. And of course, that's what dinosaur means. Terrible lizards. And, yeah, it does seem to suggest that Leviathan breathes fire.
And I'm developing a theory on how that might have been metabolically happened.
Right, now, he uses here the bombardier beetle.
Yeah.
Okay? Now, the bombardier beetle is an interesting bug. It mixes hydroquinones and hydrogen peroxide together, shoots them out the back end with the boiling point of water. All right? You scale something like that up to the size of a dinosaur, perhaps. I think there might have been other things that could happen also.
Yeah, phosphine.
You do a lot of different chemical reactions there. You just don't want to burn the animal's snout. Okay, so that's going to be your big thing. It's going to be tricky to pull off. We do seem to see accounts in other, around the world of various other kinds of creatures. And a lot of these seem to fit dragons. There's the account in, I'm going to use the other book since I don't have the pictures. For instance, St. George and the Dragon. There's also the account of that one in the 4th century there. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Sirach is a dragon, okay, that they put on their gates. Now again, these could be mythological. Everybody could have been doing, pre-flood peyote, whatever, that kind of thing. All right? But it could be that they're actually seeing real creatures. There's lots of descriptions of these sorts of things. Now, I also had on the slideshow here I think it's called the Embarcadero artifacts from South America. These look like various types of dinosaurs, and it looks like they're carved before modern times. All right. Now, some people, of course, are saying they're fake, but then you look at various other. You see pictographs around the world too. There's dinosaur pictographs, for instance, over in Arizona. And a lot of these suggest a bipedal dinosaur. All right? So there's stuff like this all around the world. These things perhaps point to a time when they not only existed, but they made it through the flood. Okay, so you got questions here. All right, go ahead.
Question about Job.
Go ahead.
When God was talking to him, I assume Job knew what God is talking about. So that tells you Job has seen one of those. You would think.
Yeah, but what people say today is, well, no, he didn't. These were animals that God was talking about or something. I'm not sure. What's interesting is all the animals God talks about beforehand are real things.
Yeah.
These seem to be real things too. And with Leviathan, there's some stuff in there. His teeth are terrible round about. If it's a plesiosaur or that type, their teeth are on the outside, so you actually see them like a crocodile sort of thing. All right? It says in the King James, for instance, and I'm just using that because it's very interesting, it says that there's sort of like an oint or a floating stuff on the water. This was just suggests some kind of material, whatever it was that ignited for the flames would float, oil floats, these kinds of things. So there might be something to that there. But yeah, it suggests that these are real creatures that Job was seeing because of, right? Oh yeah, that's a crocodile. Well, you know, they'd hunted crocodiles in Egypt, all these other places. Now it's true we have some fossil crocodiles, like what they used to call Phobosuchus, which get up to 40 feet long. All right, so there's some big boys. There were some big boys. We find them as fossils. But I don't think it's talking about that. It says he beholds everything high, these kinds of things. That would suggest a longer neck and just a different kind of creature. All right?
Plus, everything that's described is the sea. It's talking about harpoons, it's talking about seamen, it's not a river. And the crocodiles are making rivers and marshes.
Well, we do find them around the edges of continents too, but
No,
still.
they will swim in salt water, but that's not their main habitat. This
Yeah, most
creature
of them are
their main
freshwater,
habitat
right.
was the sea.
There are saltwater crocodiles. We found them 1,000 miles out, but it's not. It doesn't seem to suggest that. Those were words for that, I think, back then. All right. So some of the questions are: well, all right, that means these creatures would have been on the ark. How do you fit a dinosaur on the ark? Well,
Easy.
all right. Okay. This crowd, it's not. It's gonna be hard. All right. We have found eggs. Now Noah wasn't out there Easter egg hunting. Okay. That's not what he was doing. The Bible, in fact, says the animals came to Noah. All right. Just like you saw in that terrible movie by Russell Crowe. That there's a couple scenes in there that are cool. The animals are coming on. All right. The other part where he's a homicidal maniac trying to chase down his daughter. What was that all about? All right. Anyway, we have dinosaur eggs. We know they started out small. Okay. We actually have growth sequences of a lot of reptile or a lot of the dinosaurs, and so it might be that juveniles came on the ark. That would make more sense
Naturally.
anyway, because you would, you don't need the big boys. The big boys are probably very old and very nasty. All right. Dinosaurs perhaps were like modern day reptiles in the sense that they grew all their lives. They reached a certain extent, but they continue to grow perhaps. So you take babies on the ark. You didn't need to take every different species. Right now there's about 1,100 species of dinosaurs classified. We could probably break those down into maybe 30 or 40 different types at the most. All right? There are maybe 5 different types of sauropods. The brachiosaurs, there's the camarasaurids, there's the diplodocids, these kinds of things, and they break into certain categories. Same with the others, all right? Evolutionists have a tendency to what we call split when they classify things. And so they'll make nice little trains of things, oh, this one obviously came from that, and this one looks like it might be a descendant of that. And God said, no, these are just like dogs, variations on a type. All right, look at all the variation in dogs. We know all dogs have come from basically wild wolves, foxes, that kind of thing. All right, last few thousand years. A lot of the breeds actually in the last couple hundred years by people doing stuff. You've got Great Danes and then Chihuahuas. What did you do with that? That's almost not a dog. Sorry, I got one, so I do that. But look at the variation in that, okay? How far we can take that? Well, we can't do experiments with dinosaurs, all right? We just don't have them around. We don't know which ones interbred and how they all... We don't know how the Earth was... Most creationists now are thinking that all the continents were together before the flood, and they split apart quickly.
Right.
This idea of continental sprint or catastrophic plate tectonics.
Correct.
And so, for instance, we find ceratopsians here and over here, and if you put the continents together, all right, where they're separate biomes, essentially, that they were locked into, and that these disappeared at the time of the flood. We don't think there were giant mountains before the flood. It seems to suggest gentle rolling hills. All right? So what could have separated them?
Evolutionists agree with that. They don't believe there were high mountains before. And the ceratopsians, they can make a great evolutionary chain, but they're all found together.
Yeah, they're all found. You got lots of
Protoceratops to Triceratops.
Exactly. So you got them all together. You got a lot of variations of the kind there. All right. The last thing it looks like around the edges, if we put all these continents together, there were floating forests, perhaps, maybe going out 100, 150 miles. This is where we get the lepidodendron trees and siglaria trees. Some of the stuff we don't see
Permian.
anymore. All right. They're hollow. There's also, for instance, 10-inch cockroaches and 6-foot-long millipedes and a foot wide, all right? So there's a lot of cool stuff. Yeah, all right? And so it's environments that we don't even see anymore. They're probably gone forever, all right? Well, all right, until we clone one up, or, you know, when Jesus comes back and, boy, what is heaven gonna be like? All right? So we've got a lot of that. So these are the kinds of things we try and figure out. You're trying to unscramble basically the flood. That's gonna be it. That's a tough call. Yes, sir.
I have a few questions.
Go ahead.
How do you get the fossil in the first place? What makes a fossil?
Okay, how do you make a fossil? It looks like you take it and you bury it. But you just can't bury it, because we know if you just bury somebody in the ground, they rot, fall apart, and even the bones go away. So it looks like they have to be buried under the right kind of thing. And I grew up in Chicago, and some of the gangsters used to do what I call good fossilization. They would put you in cement overshoes, all right, in buildings, all right? I think you could fossilize somebody like that, perhaps. It looks like you have to have the bone, or the put in the right place to replace the bone with minerals, all right? Answers in Genesis has one of these. They have the cowboy boot with a leg in there, and it's all fossilized. It looks like whatever the thing landed in, mineralized what is going on. It doesn't take a long time to make a fossil, it looks like. It takes the right kind of condition. So for instance, in most people's mind, it takes a long time to make a fossil. You can't do that because it won't be there, all right? So it looks like you have the right set of conditions. Now, what's really amazing when you look at the geologic record, we find a lot of fossils. I mean, like I said, there's dinosaurs in Dinosaur National Monument, just all jammed up against the side of a mountain or something like that. I mean, hundreds of bones, all right? So whatever caught and buried these things looks like it had to be sort of rapid, very rapid, okay, and under the right kind of condition.
Most of that deposition is volcanic ash.
Well, not in the Cretaceous, or not in most of it is sedimentary deposits.
It's sedimentary, volcanic ash, but it's got volcanic ash in all of it.
It's laid
It's called
down by
bentonite.
water.
It's called
Okay.
bentonite, and it's laid down by water.
Right, so you got chemical things going on.
Volcanic and
And they're
ocean.
going on at a scale we don't see today. We
Right.
saw a little bit, for instance, on Mount St. Helens. We saw the trees get whacked off, dropped in the water, and then they're falling down like this. The stumps waterlog and go to the bottom, and then peat is piling up on top of them. Now, what's really interesting about that is we can go a little bit over, and we can go to the forests. For instance, in Yellowstone, there are multiple forests stacked up on top of each other.
Volcanic
And they look
ash.
a lot like that. The trees have no roots, basically. It's just the root balls there, and they're poking through various layers. Looks
Petrified
like a
forest.
catastrophic event. So we might see things on a very small scale of the type that was going on during the flood.
Petrified forest, same thing.
Same thing, yes.
It's volcanic ash.
Carry a little bit further, and a few vivid examples. Jeremy and I went on a field a few years ago to visit a fossilized whale skeleton over in Orange County. This is a baby whale, and it was buried in a dark gray, very abrasive, gritty material, very, very uniform texture. This whale was preserved all the way to the baleins and the cartilage between the bones, an articulated skeleton. And so what you have, you construct there is a sedimentary deposit, all right, which is to say a volcano got into a really foul mood somewhere not too far from where the whale was swimming. And we're talking major quantities of ash that landed on the water and buried the whale.
Santiago Peak.
Huh?
Santiago Peak in the Santa Ana Mountains. That was a volcano.
Yeah, and so you have this whale preserved, and if you want to liken volcanic ash to something we see nowadays, it would be concrete cement. Okay, you have something that comes out, it has been very hot, it is very dry, it is, shall we call it, in a high chemical state, very high reactivity, and ready to react, especially when it meets water. When you go over to the petrified forest and you see cubic miles of volcanic ash, and it's not fused together, it's loose. And you have the chunks of wood that have been permineralized, and that particular rock material is aggregate, petrified wood. And you have a similar situation, vast quantities of highly reactive material in water, reacting fast and once. Okay, and so you have things like thunder eggs and geodes, and you also have preserved trees, preserved in very fine detail. And this process would not be something you universally see because tremendous amount of water and tremendous amount of volcanic activity are not happening on a scale now that we see evidence of. And so you have, many tons of petrified wood done in a process that would not repeat if you buried wood in that same material, because now with the reaction cycle having gone through, the volcanic ash now is fairly inert. Chemically speaking, it is not reactive, like when it first came out of the volcano, being completely dry, and then ready to do something when it gets dissolved in water.
One more question.
Go ahead, sir.
Have they found any dinosaurs and some non-dinosaurs together? Like mammals, anything, or it's kind of dinosaurs are separate found, mammals are, do they find mammals or?
They find small mammals sometimes, all right? They're not exactly in the same place, although some of them might be suggested to be in the same layer, all right? So you find them like in one place. For instance, if you're looking in like South Africa, let's see, it doesn't look like South Africa at all, does it? All right. You find a lot of mammal-like reptiles. In fact, as you look at the layers that go in there, it goes up to around the Lesotho there, and you can actually see the evolutionary transition. All right, this is where a lot of this comes from with the mammal-like reptiles, for instance. What it looks like, though, is you're picking up different environments as the flood going on. All right, and you're picking up higher and higher terrestrial stuff. It looks like the mammals and the dinosaurs didn't necessarily live in the same place either. Now, again, fossilization is not necessarily spread across the whole thing. You've got little pockets and stuff here. All right. So as we study the fossil record, we try and it's like unscrambling something. Now, the evolutionist has some presuppositions going in. For instance, that these are evolutionary series, and that we radiocarbon date, not radioactive date the methods, and all that go with it. All right. I did a talk a few months ago on the radioisotope dating and why we think there's some issues with that. If that's not correct, then what we're looking at is, like I said, burial in different environments around the world. All right, and we've got similar creatures sort of placed all over. All right, because we find dinosaurs widespread. We find mammals in maybe different places. The other thing we don't find is flowering plants with dinosaurs. A lot, the angiosperms. Those are not there. Okay, so the environment seems to be different. And it might be that the way God kept these creatures separate is by having their food sources very particular and not in other places. All right, so you wouldn't venture out into the flower bed because that's not what you ate. You ate the ferns. All right, these sorts of things. Just how that environment was all set up. Now, there's a few things that happen in fossilization. We have the main forces that are going on is, there's hydrodynamic sorting.
Big things like dinosaur bones would probably not locate small mammal bones in the same place.
Right.
Because those would be distinct enough so that they wouldn't sort together.
So at least in a layer, we see sorting of that type going on. It suggests, one, the layer was laid down fairly quickly. Like, for instance, in the middle of the limestone in the Grand Canyon, the red wall limestone, we find a burial layer of ammonites that all seem to be pointing in a certain direction and all that. And when we did the analysis of it, it looks like a mass kill event. It goes across the entire canyon, over into California, and a little bit up into Colorado, I believe. All right? We don't see stuff on that kind of scale today. And so we go, wow, how does that happen? All right? We have hydrodynamic sorting. We have where they lived is where they died. So for instance, like I said, if these are in separate biomes or different environments, you're not going to find them necessarily together. Okay? So that's going to be some of the reasons why the fossils are found what they were, where they are. basically.
So is there any findings where a mammal versus dinosaur versus fish all found kind of together? Or there's not one so far found?
Well, all the layers are sedimentary layers, so we find marine creatures through the whole thing, okay? And in fact, marine creatures are used as what they call index fossils, all right? In a lot of ways. So when they find a certain marine creature, this suggests this is this time period in history, whatever that is. You know, it's the Maastrichtian in the Cretaceous, all right? And these have been worked out in all over the world, kind of a thing. We don't find the geologic column in any one place on the Earth. I think the biggest chunk of it, like this, is in Poland or something like that. You find bits and pieces. So at the Grand Canyon, for instance, you'll find the Precambrian layers going all the way up to the Kaibab limestone, which, let's see, what's a Kaibab limestone? Remember anybody? I think it's not even Jurassic. I think it's below the Jurassic, or below the Triassic. All right, and then as you get above it and go up the Grand Staircase, for instance, you get into the Kayenta Formation, which you get small mammals.
Mesozoic.
You also have dinosaur tracks in there. Okay, so you might not find the things together, but there's some interesting stuff going on. All right. Small mammals. Mammals were small for hundreds of millions of years, you know, or 100 million years or so, before they took over, okay, before the end of the age of dinosaurs, and then the mammals sort of took over as the evolutionary view. We do find small mammals in some of these places, but they don't seem to be the large creatures that dominated afterwards. Now, why would that be? Well, we think the world before the flood might have been a milder, warmer climate. Okay, and if dinosaurs were either reptilian or more like this, it would have been an easier time. Okay, the mammals, hot-blooded or warm-blooded, I'm going to use this thing, might have been restricted in environments that way. We think after the flood, because you have these continents moving around, and you have a lot of volcanic aerosols up in the air, you're going to block out the sunlight, and we might have had an ice age post-flood, 500 to 1,000 years long. This is going to be really hard on the dinosaurs. In fact, I just saw a thing now where they said that large meteor that hit for the dinosaurs probably made it cold, and that was the thing that killed them. All right. I kind of like that idea. All right. And so you would have limited it, even if they were to survive the flood. All right. Representative types would have been on the ark. They would have died off afterwards, perhaps because the climate was so harsh, and only the animals that had internal heating, okay, and big fur would have made it through. And then they're able to populate. If you've got a clean slate too, and you've got reptiles, dinosaurs and all that, mammals seem to reproduce a lot faster, all right, because of the higher energetics. And so they're going to take over by default, okay? So that might be working itself into all this. There are several lines of things that we need to think about when we think about what happened pre and post flood from a creationist standpoint now.
Where did this giant meteor hit?
Well, one of the big places on the Yucatan
Mexico.
Peninsula in Mexico.
Where is the
Chicxulub.
thing?
Now, Tunguska event's a little bit different. That happened in 1918. And that's a weird one. It looks like something came down, didn't necessarily touch the ground, but flattened the trees for hundreds of miles in several directions. All right? And so that old adage, if a tree falls in the forest, will you hear it? Well, somebody heard that one and is deaf, okay? Yeah. That's a weird one. It looks like whatever it is, maybe it had been a meteorite or something that exploded in the air. Okay? Really weird. Now, if you scale that up, the one they said in the Yucatan Peninsula was really
Same
big.
thing.
And it kicked up this iridium layer. They find this layer of what they call iridium all around the world, and supposedly that's indicative of what killed, you know, part of what the end of the Cretaceous is how they use it. Okay, it wouldn't be a problem for me as a creationist to have a meteor hit the Earth, or a couple of them during the time of the flood also, or even a trigger event perhaps. All right, Yellowstone is one of the biggest calderas in the world. They say, Dr. Austin, one of the people I used to work with, the geologist, said, if that volcano blew off, the only place to be where it would be safe would be low orbit of space shuttle, okay? Because that's how bad that would be. It's a volcano on a scale we just haven't seen. You know, St. Helens is nothing, all right? And Yellowstone's doing this right now, I think.
Yeah.
It's coming up, huh?
How far across
Roads
is
are
that
melting.
Caldera?
Oh, I think it's miles, isn't it? I don't know,
Now,
remember.
the Caldera is up in,
Yeah,
and there are some other mountains in the southwest that are way bigger than.
Yellowstone's is, I think, is, 40, 50 miles, something like that.
And Chesapeake,
Even bigger, I think.
Chesapeake Bay too.
We'll say that's another subject.
Yeah, it's a whole, and then St. Helens is one of the small volcanoes along the western coast here. You've got Rainier, you've got, what's the other big one? Shasta. Shasta's, it's about the same size with Rainier and Hood. Okay, yeah, you don't wanna mess with those guys, alright? Until we got this going off during the time of the flood also, okay? So a lot of factors are coming into play. I don't know, I sort of wandered off the question, I think. Yes, sir?
If a lot of the biggest majority of the dinosaurs died at the flood, right?
Well, we would say there might have been representative types on the ark, okay?
But so
The fossils we find are the ones that died during the flood.
okay, so if the ones that died during the flood, that would also mean that where's all the humans that died during the flood? Why aren't their bones? right
Good
there
question.
too?
All right, how big was the human population before the flood? Well, we read in Genesis, well, we don't know, okay. All right, it doesn't say. Now, there's a few ways to look at this. If, for instance, the patriarchs are what we see in the Old Testament, the average lifespan there is, I think, something like 900 years. If they had kids, it looks like they could probably have kids for maybe, 700 years, maybe a little less. Ladies, sorry. All right. You could raise up a sizable population before the flood. Most translations that we like is about 1650, 600 years from the creation to the flood. So 1600 years you might have been able to dig it. So where did all the people go?
Ground bits?
Hmm?
Were they ground to bits?
Drowned
In the
bits. There might not have been as big a population. Dinosaurs don't know how to build boats, people do. If you're swimming in the water, you're also pink and, soft on the outside, crunchy on the inside, so you might be good food.
Sea creatures.
You're right, that's an interesting question. Where are all the people? How big was the population before the flood? These are questions that it'd be nice to answer. Now, we do find human fossils, all right? Most of that is probably post-flood.
Right.
Current thinking in creationism thinks that from the end of the Cretaceous, KT is all right, all the way through like the Miocene, Eocene, and all this, these would have been post-flood deposits.
Holocene.
All right, and there's where you find, Australopithecines and Homo erectus and some of these other sorts of things. But they're more localized and it's a smaller thing that's going on there when these things get fossilized. All right. Also, post-flood, you might not have had people, not as bigger groups because there's not a lot of food source. And so if a mini ice age hit, Noah landed on Mount Ararat, that's where the Bible seems to suggest. Right now, that's in eastern Turkey. Okay, if you came down to the well-watered plains of Shinar, that's basically where Iraq and Iran are today. All right, it was probably well-watered post-flood for sure. And then in a lot of these continents, we've been slowly drying out. And so we see the big deserts in North Africa, here in the Southwest. These things have been slowly drying out since the time of the flood. All right, so you've got then civilization starting what we call the Fertile Crescent, which is both of us kind of agree on that. And then there's something that sort of radiated everybody out. Okay, we would suggest it was the Tower of Babel and some of the migrations post that. All right, and then they wandered into different countries. Evolutionists suggest that civilization kind of radiated out of Africa, actually. Some of the more things, but it's close. Okay, now the time frames are different. They suggest millions of years for hominid evolution.
10,000.
We would suggest a lot of these times could be collapsed down, even within carbon 14
4,000.
and the Egyptian chronologies. We think that might be collapsible. All right, so it's on the order of thousands of years, and we're seeing some of that come down all the time. All right. Don't know where all the people are. There's some books that talk about these sorts of things. The Answers book that Answers in Genesis puts out has some suggestions on that. And if you look on their websites, Answers in Genesis, there's all kinds of papers on that might address that more fully than I did.
Yeah, the Yellowstone Caldera, they said 35 to 40 miles wide.
I think, is that what they say?
That's what they say.
Okay, so that's a big volcano, okay? If St. Helens is a mile wide, and you've got something that big, because they found the ash from it, I mean, I think all across the United States. There's certain layers you can find. So when that baby blew off, all right, that was bad news. So that tells you something else. If you got Noah in the ark, you remember that little Bible verse that says that God remembered Noah in the ark? Good thing, right? Okay? Imagine what he's hearing. Okay? Just the noise itself. And God's watching over this, because you've also got tidal waves that would be generated, these sorts of things. Now the ark, the way it was built, we think, was pretty good for riding out storms. We think it could have gone about, I think it's like 35 degrees or more this way and still ride it. Now you don't want to do that, several times with all those animals on there, because, it gets messy, all right? But to say that it was capable. So when, for instance, it says in the Bible that the water covered all the high mountains 15 cubits and upward, a lot of people think that's the draft of the ark, or how much water displacement, about half of its height, okay? Because it said it was, 30 cubits high, something like that. All right, so to sink about fully loaded, half in the water. That's pretty good. That's kind of, it's a lot similar to a lot of the ocean tankers that we send out there. They're low profile, all that. In fact, the Navy's building ships more and more low profile, just because they cut through the water easier too.
John, could we have the drawing now? People are fixing the
People are starting to leave. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, let's have the drawing. We can talk more afterwards if you want. Let's see, my phone rings, so I better